we'll get there soon. But I think this talk is actually very exciting, and thank you all for coming over. I have Matt Shelton here, who's the Senior Technical Account Manager at Atlassian, and what Matt does in his at his work is actually working with Atlassian's largest customers.
I'll just tell them all over
Okay,
again.
you can just tell that.
Yeah, it's cool.
But welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you, Arsene. Appreciate that. So my name is Matt Shelton. I'm a Technical Account Manager, or TAM, at Atlassian. The team of TAMs work with our largest enterprise customers to help them make the most out of their Atlassian investment. So we work on projects like helping them to scale Agile, do DevOps transformations, and literally everything in between. So when it comes to continuous deployment and the journey to continuous delivery at scale, as a TAM, what I'm going to do with a customer is to help them take a look at where they are right now and evaluate where they want to go and help them chart a course from point A to point B, or A to Z, as it usually is. So that's my goal here today as well. I'm going to talk through a variety of customer types and how we might go about giving them advice for scaling continuous delivery and deployment. And I don't have any cool train sounds, unfortunately, but so I'm going to make a couple of assumptions because otherwise this talk would be about 6 hours long. The first one is that you all understand some of the key concepts of DevOps, like reducing time to market and running what you build. And second, that I don't need to convince you that there's value in adopting Agile practices, Agile at scale, and DevOps culture. What I am going to do is talk through some of the problems that enterprises are facing when they're trying to solve continuous delivery and continuous deployment as they get bigger. And then I'll detail some of the struggles that organizations have when evaluating the right tools to do the right jobs, and go through a solution or two for a handful of various customer types. While I'm doing that, I'm also going to explain how Bamboo and Bitbucket Pipelines each work. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about the ecosystem that surrounds continuous delivery and deployment. But before we talk about solving problems, we have to set the stage and agree on what the problem is. So I'm going to talk about a generic software workflow from idea to delivery, and then talk about some of the problems that you might run into along the way. So we start with a feature that's been given to a development team to work on. A developer picks it up, they start working on it. They're really great at what they do, and so very quickly they commit some source-to-source control. It builds. Something is packaged up, it's able to be delivered right into production because it passes its test with flying colors, and then a customer receives it, there's much rejoicing, everybody goes out for drinks. It's always that simple, right? Well, no, each one of these stages has something that could go wrong. What if the build worked on the developer's machine, they were very happy with it, but what the customer got didn't work? It either didn't meet their expectations or it just flat out broke. What if the build, again, worked on the developer's machine, but it didn't deploy in production for one reason or another? What if, while they were building it, there was a merge conflict with a colleague, and that doesn't work very well? And what if this actually wasn't the highest value story that they could have chosen to work on? So the business spent all this valuable development time on something that was actually unhelpful to the customer. Now, there's been a whole Agile track going on here at Summit, so I'm actually going to skip that last one. But I would like to talk about how we can mitigate some of the items on the right-hand side of this process flow. The first thing that we can look at is continuous integration. Continuous integration, or CI, has kind of one central point, and that is to detect a change and then test that change and broadcast the results out to whomever might need to consume them. It should be in place from as soon as the developer starts work all the way through to when something is about to go into production. CI is there to help a developer find problems early, when they're cheaper to fix, and instead of later, when they're possibly expensive or public. So for example, with continuous integration and some really well-written automated tests, you can potentially avoid the results of a broken build or a merge or something like that. It conflicts with another teammate's work, because you can see that the build associated with your changes fails before potentially someone else sees that. The second is continuous deployment, or CD. So if a change works, it passes muster, then it needs to be deployed out onto an environment that is very similar to what it's going to be on eventually. This could be a cloud service or a hardware simulator, anything that is going to be just like where the environment is in production. Continuous deployment has essentially the same motivation as continuous integration, which is we want to detect a problem earlier on than when it is really, really expensive. So fix something early when it's cheap. So by doing that, we can potentially mitigate the risk of deploying something that could never actually be deployed to production by catching problems early. And it should really be in place. Deploying newly packaged code out to smaller test and then eventually larger pre-production environments from the beginning, that once there is something that can be packaged up all the way to the end. And finally, we have continuous delivery, which, because all of us love acronyms, it very helpfully has the exact same acronym as continuous deployment. I like to think of continuous delivery as what happens when you take business rules and put them on the end of a CI/CD pipeline. Because for some organizations, your code is going to ship right away. Some other organizations, it's going to be later down the line. And it doesn't really matter because each business has different needs. But the goal here is to reduce the time from when something has been built to when we can actually deploy it. So by validating functionality earlier on in the pipeline, we're able to try to mitigate customer issues before they actually happen. Now, this isn't to say that bugs won't occur. Bugs will absolutely occur. We all make mistakes. But by streamlining the process from point A to point B, we're able to address issues so that when they do occur, we can get fixes out to production as quickly as possible. Because again, at the end of the day, the shorter the gap between an idea and delivery, the quicker a business can achieve its goals. Now, we also find that it's really important that the results of things that happen all the way over here on the right side of our chart make their results known to people who generally aren't necessarily always paying attention to what's going on there until someone yells. We want to get that information radiated all the way to the left-hand side of the screen. And quite obviously, I'm setting myself up to talk about what shifting left means. Now, this term is super buzzwordy. You've probably heard it 5 or 6 times in the last 2 hours. That's OK, because shifting left actually clearly describes an idea, which is I want to take information and give it to other people than would normally have access to it so that they can do something with that information sooner. Because every single one of those groups that I was describing, everyone who might be an owner of an idea, an owner of building something, an owner of deploying something, they each have information that's critical to the whole process. But if the business owner never talks to the person who's actually responsible for running things that they've asked for, they might not have the overall best business outcomes. So for example, if we use continuous integration, some really good unit tests, some people who really care about the quality of code, a bug that might normally have occurred for a customer, for a user of that service, or might have been caught through manual or exploratory testing, we might be able to catch that much earlier in the process. A developer could catch it with their code and with the results of the CI process and fix that before it would ever release. With continuous deployment, a build that might work just fine on the developer's machine or in a smaller test environment might fail to deploy in a larger environment with a different configuration. But again, by using continuous deployment, we can catch that in pre-production and catch it before it releases. And then by using continuous delivery or some concept of feature flagging, we can test an alpha feature or do A/B testing on something that's out in prod and determine that maybe the idea that we had was terrible. And instead, we want to get that information back to the business, show them that there's something better for them to invest their time in, and then start over. The bottom line from all of this is that a continuous delivery pipeline with organizational alignment allows the business to expose issues sooner and save time and money. This is probably not the first time you've heard these things, which is good. And if it is, that's still good. You're a step ahead regardless. And the reason that I really want to talk about this today, though, is that embracing these practices, let alone picking the right tools to help you embrace these practices, requires that an organization knows who they are. It requires that you know where you're going, you know who you serve, and you know your own limits. And all those things can be hard. So I want to read this to you to illustrate a point. A member of the Ops Genie engineering team wrote this about a year ago, and so I wanted to share it with you today. Cloud native is, this was a year ago, a new approach to build and run applications that can leverage the cloud computing delivery model. The objective is to improve speed and stability by optimizing the pipeline by leveraging the cloud-native model at each stage, from coding to production, by making use of tools, such as containers and orchestrators combined with additional tooling. As cloud-native environments get more and more traction, the tooling around these environments continue to evolve to fit the various needs. Now, some of you might be thinking, yeah, so yeah, I get that. That's fine. I like cloud-native. Others of you are existing in realities for whom this is frightening, this is daunting, and you don't like that all of the industries are going this direction. And then there are other customers that are everywhere in between. And that is the reality, and the struggle is real. Many of the customers that are sitting in this room are here because you create something that enables potential. We make software. So do a good number of our customers. Others make cars or rockets, pharmaceuticals, implants that let kids hear for the first time. Technology opens a lot of doors. And if you put a useful tool in the hands of a creative and ambitious person, sometimes you get unexpected results. Sometimes we call that progress. Sometimes we call that risk. It depends on your context. It's not always so simple. It's important to realize and remember that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Many organizations have different realities: legal compliance, privacy, information security, financial regulations, so on. We understand, we recognize that our customers have to worry about time to market and surviving an audit. We truly believe, you've heard this a million times at this point, we truly believe that our mission is to unleash the potential in every team. But every team is different. Sometimes not every team can take advantage of every new shiny tool. Now, I do have customers out there who would like to use every new product as soon as it was released on the market. The developers just want to try everything. They get their hands on something the day it releases and they say, look at how awesome this will be. This is the 97th JavaScript framework I have learned. Okay. And then I have other customers who are a little afraid of that level of progress. They want to take a more cautious approach. So that's what I'm talking about here today. How do we make sure that customers of all types and all types of environments can have success with continuous deployment and delivery? We see our tools as the collaboration framework for DevOps, but making use of any tool requires you actually understand your people and your practice and your culture first. Now, I am absolutely not a fan of one-size-fits-all solutions. We're talking about software here. We have a couple 100,000 customers. They use our tools every day, so no one solution is going to work for everybody. And since there are limitless ways to categorize organizations, you all are going to be here for about the next 4 hours. That's cool. Now, I'm going to talk about two categories. I'm going to talk about flexibility, and I'm going to talk about risk tolerance. So when I say flexibility, I'm really talking about how much leeway do we give creators to create. Can they use, again, whatever new framework is out there, new tool, new cloud service, or are there standards that govern the choices that they can make? You could have an organization that is really, really rigid or highly flexible. Risk tolerance refers to the ability of an organization to both handle and mitigate business risk without significant impact to their operations. So this too exists on the spectrum from low to high. Is an organization completely intolerant of risk or completely averse to risk? Or are they able to be tolerant of new risks with quick or well-exercised mitigations? And since each organization is going to live somewhere in there, they have to find the right balance. And there are going to be factors, internal and external, that push and pull them around this chart. An organization, when they first get started, is going to be one place, and as they get older and more mature, and as they potentially go public and have new regulations, they're going to move around. And so as I talk about different customer types, I want to ask you to do one thing. Think about where your organization is here within these two criteria. Think about where you'd like to be, and what are the factors that move you around or push and pull you in different directions. Along those same lines, many organizations have actually already made choices about their tooling before they've taken a moment to think about their culture. And I regularly remind my customers that they need to take a good look at where their organization actually wants to go and then talk about how to enable that before they start signing POs and paying for software. So here's our first organization. They're a startup. They're just on the edge of profitability. Their competition is everywhere, and they're pretty flexible with how their teams work and what tools they use. They're cloud native because they think that's the fastest way for them to get things to market. Their risk tolerance is low because either they haven't actually had any real issues, or maybe they won't handle major risks particularly well when they arise, or they might take them without fully considering the possibilities of failure. Now, this could be some newer non-public companies. This could be industries that are really more focused on time to market. And the driving force for them when selecting what tools to use is going to be the team or the product. They might want to standardize someday. That sounds nice for maybe older organizations. But for them, they're really more important about moving as quickly as humanly possible. Now, they do need to think about to where they're deploying. You can't just use anything and go anywhere. And since I said the customer is cloud native, we want to focus on more cloud native tools for them. Those tools are probably running on someone else's hardware, right? So they do at some point need to think about who are all the players here. It's the application provider, the underlying technology, and then them as the consumer. So there's a lot of responsibility to be shared there when it comes to ensuring that everything's going to run securely. And as a TAM, I would also tell a customer like this to think long and hard about things that they could do now that'll pay dividends later, like reusing tools and code and processes and thinking about the bigger context they might exist in someday. So for an organization like this, they're also going to see really great returns by embracing DevOps philosophies and cultural practices. And if they're really letting the product team drive their tooling choices, then it's likely that they're also responsible for running what they build, or they probably at least should be. So they're going to want a solution that's going to tie together well with the other platforms they're using. So from an Atlassian perspective, what I would advise them to do is take a look at Bitbucket Cloud and Bitbucket Pipelines for CI and CD. For a cloud-native organization, having source code and build and deployment systems also cloud-native is really going to pay great dividends for them over time. And as they grow, Bitbucket Cloud will grow with them. There are already hundreds of thousands of developers using Bitbucket Cloud every day. Now, what makes pipelines so special and works so well alongside the Bitbucket repository is it's directly linked with a team's code. So for each repository, you can define a pipeline with multiple branch-specific stages that all run in containers cloud native. I'm going to get into the weeds for just a moment to explain how pipelines works. So in Bitbucket Cloud, for a given repository, you can just enable pipelines. A repository's pipeline has some important pieces. So first we have the pipeline itself, which is a set of actions configured in a plain text markup language called YAML. You can have multiple stages. They can run in parallel. You can basically configure the thing to do whatever you want it to do. Then we have a pipeline service. This is where all of the containers execute. That's something that Atlassian runs and maintains. And then we have Docker Hub, which is where container images live. You can use public images or ones you craft yourself. So when a change is pushed to a branch in a repository for which pipelines is configured, it jumps into action. It sets up the build environment with the container that has been specified. And then once the environment is up, our first stage here is to go ahead and build the code that we've just changed. And we're very good at what we do, so we're just going to get a green check mark over here. And then, because we're also very responsible, we want to make sure we're not going to have any failures. We've written some tests, and so the next stage is to test that code. And again, we're very good at what we do. Green check mark. And finally, we're going to go ahead and deploy that code out to a cloud provider, and the containers are torn down. And now, using this multi-stage model, you can actually deploy changes to lower environments, other pre-production environments, performance environments, and so on, with approval steps in between if you need. Recently, to add some capabilities around reuse, the Bitbucket Cloud team recently released a feature for pipelines called Bitbucket Pipes, which makes it easier to build CI and CD workflows without the hassle of having to manage all the integrations on your own. There's things in there like deployment to Microsoft Azure and AWS and pinging out notifications to Slack and OpsGenie. And you can also build your own pipes in order to provide reusable steps within your organization's pipelines. Now, I mentioned that YAML is plain text, and anyone who's ever worked in plain text configurations and markup languages knows that over time your eyes can start to cross as you're staring at text like that. And what I really like here is that if you stare long enough at that, you can see what the team was doing here. They're running an elastic beanstalk job, and then if it succeeds, they're doing one type of alert, and if it fails, they're doing another type of alert. But that is a whole lot of configuration to do those three things. But with pipes, we can actually take those things and break them down into configurable components and make our build definition way easier to read by simply configuring the pipes themselves. So if you've never had a chance to take a look at that, I really would encourage you to check it out. OK. So next up is the organization right smack dab in the middle of our chart. Now, they are pretty aware of their risks. Mitigating them is important. They've been around the block a few times. They're strategic about their risks. They've probably had a couple of compliance exercises. And so as a result, while they want to be really flexible, they also appreciate that there's added cost to an organization for over-diversifying their practices over time. This is probably most customers out there, especially public ones that aren't too highly regulated. The driving factor for their tooling choices is now no longer just the product or the team, but now the team of teams. The teams themselves and the individuals are encouraged to innovate, but to do so in a way that keeps in mind the best interests of the overall organization. So they're going to want to favor technologies that are widely reusable and applicable to other teams. Well-scaled solutions for CI and CD are going to depend a bit upon the organization's deployment platform or platforms, how that happens, are there process gates, and things like that. So for customers like this, we actually find that they can be particularly successful with Bitbucket Data Center and Bamboo to meet their needs. Bamboo's build and deployment agents can run on a variety of platforms, behind the firewall, public cloud providers, you name it. And as an organization grows, both Bitbucket Data Center and Bamboo can scale up or be federated in order to provide the scale that a customer needs. In addition, teams that are using Bitbucket are able to run static analysis tools and push their results right back into Bitbucket using code insights. Quite frankly, this is one of my favorite features of Bitbucket, and I don't feel like it's gotten enough love, so I want to give you an example of what that looks like. So here we have a quality report that has been shown through a pull request for a particular pull request that a developer has created. We have Artifactory scans, Nexus, Sneak, SonarQube, and X-Ray going on here. And Sneak and X-Ray both passed. We got some green checks here. But SonarQube found a bunch of potential quality issues. And so the developer is able to see these results right in the pull request, address these problems, update the pull request, and then get green check marks everywhere, and then move forward. Build scanning is not new, right? I mean, it's been around for a long time, but the results are often in the scanning tool, in someone's email. Maybe it's been pushed to a chat tool, or maybe it's like, I used to be an engineering manager, and sometimes I would overhear other managers saying, you know, here's what your code coverage was for the last 3 weeks in meetings. Like, how's that helpful? No, but we're able to actually put the results right in the pull request, which helps the developer shorten their mean time to resolution and deliver better code. So here's our third type of customer. And this is an organization for which, over time, flexibility has either intentionally or unintentionally had to take a backseat to risk mitigation. Maybe they've had to seek some additional types of certification. Maybe they've just made some choices that over time made them say, look, we're going to do things this one way. Now, this bubble over here could be absolutely anywhere on the left side. For the sake of time, I decided to have the sample customer be really good at mitigating risk. So that's why they're up there. But generally, they'd prefer to avoid risk if at all possible. So I do want to be clear that I am not in any way criticizing organizations like this. I want my bank, my healthcare provider, my insurance provider, anyone who has my information to take risk really seriously. And as you've been walking around the conference, you might have noticed that there are a lot of banks that are Atlassian customers. This is very important to me. And I want them to be really good at managing risks when they do exist. We take seriously risks and regulatory controls and the like. Whether or not you like regulations, they are a reality, and that reality also means that you have to think about all of the downstream impacts. It does not mean that there is not a good way to scale continuous delivery. You can still meet your compliance needs. The driving factor here for an organization like this, though, is going to be the mitigation of those risks. They're going to, like the last example, want to favor technologies that are widely reusable. They're applicable to other teams. But in this case, they might actually mandate those choices through compliance processes and controls and things like that. Time to market is still important. They have a business to run, but it's less important than making sure their risks are all taken care of. Well-scaled solutions for CI and CD are probably going to favor private cloud, if any cloud at all. Shared responsibilities come a long way. Public cloud providers have come a long way, sure. But for a lot of organizations that live in this part of the chart, they're going to struggle to get out of the self-hosting business for a good long while. DevOps practices are still very possible in an organization like this, but they probably need to be deemed important at all levels of that organization. Grassroots movements are really going to struggle. But I think that by embracing choices like containerization and reuse, we can actually see a lot of success here. So I would recommend an organization like this make use of repository stored specs, which is Bamboo's configuration as code option, paired with Bamboo's per build container plugins. A customer can centralize Bamboo, embrace separation of concerns by allowing Bamboo admins to determine when and how projects are created, but then require the use of specs so that teams can actually own their pipeline. Those specs can undergo a formal code review process. And by using per-build containers, teams can use containerized resources and have the same containers from the time they start development all the way through to when their things go into production. Now, a setup like this can be scaled as an organization grows. Per-build containers don't actually have any hard-defined limits. You're limited by the underlying orchestration service. So if you've never heard of the things that I just talked about, I want to take a few minutes to explain how Bamboo and per-build containers works. And I apologize for the depth and the detail here, but in my experience as a TAM, Bamboo is actually a product that a lot of our customers don't really completely understand how it works and what all the agents are and things like that. So I do want to take a couple of minutes on that. So first we have a Bamboo server. That server contains build and deployment projects which have execution plans that detail how we're going to build something, how we're going to test it, where we're going to deploy it, and what's going to happen all along the way. And then we have Bamboo agents, and those are the things that actually do all of those things. They, since not every plan has the same requirements, teams build a lot of different things. Agents can have one or more capabilities that they broadcast back to the Bamboo server so that each execution is going to happen on an agent that's actually able to do all the things that are in the plan. So, for instance, here we have an agent that has a specific version of Postgres. Here we have one that has Selenium and Node and the ability to deploy to a specific cloud provider. Here's one that's running a Docker service. We can actually use a feature in Bamboo called Docker Runner to deploy specific containers out to a service for builds and things like that. And then finally, we have a job. And a job is a single execution of a plan. And in this case, this plan is saying that it needs to have Postgres, so it's going to be dispatched to an agent that actually has the capability. So here's what a traditional sort of set of builds would look like running in Bamboo. And the build process works like this. So a build is triggered one way or another, either because the repository has said to Bamboo, hey, I have an update, or we've got a manual execution. This build has a specific need, and so it's going to be dispatched to an agent that actually is able to handle it. You can dedicate agents to specific projects and plans. You can have a farm of agents that have a variety of capabilities. You could have one agent that can only build one thing. However you want to configure agents is it's really up to you and your business's needs. So the job is going to be sent to an agent that can actually handle the job. The results get returned to Bamboo, green check mark, or red X, but green check mark for the sake of simplicity. And this happens for a variety of plans over time. They're going to go to agents that can meet their needs, and when we actually have a job that needs to execute on an agent and no agent is available, it's going to wait, and once an agent is made available, the next job in order of execution will be dispatched. Everyone's going to be happy. Now, per-build containers is a little bit different. It's a set of plugins for Bamboo that allows you to run builds and deployments on Bamboo agents in an orchestration service like Kubernetes or Amazon ECS. And each tool and service for a build is containerized in a Docker-compatible format. And that's specified right in the build's plan. And then each execution of a Bamboo build or deployment job is going to run in a newly created image that's remote. It's an agent that's running in that containerization service. It's specifically tailored for that job, and then it destroys itself. So we need a few things to make this work. First, we need an orchestration service, like Kubernetes, ECS. We need a plugin that is specific to that orchestration service. It's going to actually orchestrate the necessary containers and their resources. And then we need a container registry that the cluster can access. And inside of it will be a default container called a sidekick that has the bare minimums for interacting with Bamboo. And then we need the build environments as well that actually have all of the bits and pieces for making sure that our builds and our deployments can run. And that's pretty much it. There are no agents running and consuming licenses until they're actually needed. So when a plan is triggered, the container orchestrator talks to the service and tells it to launch one or more containers as they are defined in the plan. We're going to have the sidekick and the build environment and any other dependencies. The images start up. The job is sent to the agent where it's run. Let's go back to Bamboo. The containers are all torn down and the agent goes away. And then as other jobs execute, even ones that have the exact same containers defined, the cluster is going to accept them. It'll expand as needed, and it's going to handle them. They're complete, and then the container images are all torn down. Now, this setup is really ideal for organizations that want to let teams own their own build pipelines and dependencies on their own timetable and their own schedule. The same containers, like I said earlier, can be used for local dev testing all the way through to production. And since the agents are destroyed after each build, this is a great way for a customer to have more diversity in terms of agent capabilities and prevent any contamination when it comes to the build environment. Now, if all of this looks familiar to any of you who are sitting there, I really want to thank you for paying attention, because a couple of minutes ago I talked about pipelines, and that looks a whole lot similar. Both applications give its users the flexibility of containerization for their pipeline. And the main benefit of per-build containers is that the systems on which it runs can be behind the firewall if needed, which, depending on organization's needs, may help it meet its compliance requirements. Speaking of compliance, let's talk about that for a bit. How many people here went and saw Guy Herbert talk yesterday about DevOps versus compliance? Great talk. I love Wolverine when he talks. He gave me this great nugget when I was preparing to give this talk, and that he said that, at Atlassian, we do peer review because that's how you build quality in Agile, but we enforce peer review because it helps us manage the risk and meet our compliance objectives. Now, as I work with larger and larger organizations who are trying to get a handle on maintaining security requirements and compliance needs while also not ticking off their users at the same time, one of the recommendations I make is to make use of existing best practices around code review for CI and CD as well, and then make that process part of their controls framework. So if you take my recommended setup from a minute ago, Bitbucket Data Center with a repository for specs that describes the build and deployment projects, and that's read in by Bamboo. You're running that using per-build containers. And you have multiple options in there that all cascade together for peer and automated review. Your code is reviewed through a pull request process that concludes code insights with static analysis and other sorts of feedback. Your deployment pipeline is reviewed through a pull request process that could include validating the container it describes. You could push that feedback through code insights if you wanted to. It has a REST API you can use. But at a minimum, it includes peer review or other levels of review by folks who really care about the quality of the products you're building. And then finally, your container images can be locally hosted, and that hosting could only include, for instance, approved images, which themselves have their definitions maintained in Bitbucket that go through a pull request process and a peer review process. I know I'm sounding like a broken record here. That's on purpose. And you could use Bamboo to spin up those agents and run all of your host scans against them to make sure that you meet your compliance requirements. By using a consistent approach to compliance controls, like peer review, separation of concerns and duties, an organization like this can embrace DevOps and its culture and use modern enterprise tools and probably make it through an audit. So my final type of customer might be a little harder to resonate with than others for some of you, but I hope not. And this is the customer that is strategic about their risk and also able to give their users a high degree of flexibility. I don't think this is impossible. I do think that it can be hard to get there. For that last type of organization, they're going to struggle to pull themselves back from corrective actions that they've taken over time. It's really normal to overcorrect after failures, or overcorrect after incidents. It's going to take slow and really deliberate and well thought out actions and changes that are intentional to organizational culture to open up doors that have been closed. Now, for the first two organizations, they may have less friction to get there, but those straight lines might look like curves depending on all the things that happen over time. Regardless of the journey, and I don't want to minimize the journey because that's very important, I think that that's where most customers want to be someday. I think they want to be in that top right corner. Quite frankly, I think this is where Atlassian is. We practice what we preach when it comes to making sure that we balance our compliance concerns with a healthy respect for controls and mitigating risk, and also giving teams flexibility where we can. And we make use of our own tools to do so. And as we get larger, sure, without a doubt, things get more difficult, more complicated. But it would be so much harder if we hadn't started this process and these practices earlier. Now, how this organization selects their tools is going to evolve as their culture evolves, but again, their culture has to come first. And they should make tooling choices that mirror their own flexibility. And that's true for all the customers I've described today, but it's more important here. That green bubble starts to slide to the left, the more locked in an organization is to a single way of working, especially if it's a way of working that they don't control. Now, you can aim for idealistic DevOps culture all you want. That sounds lofty, but probably worthwhile. But some of those components are more important than others. An organization like this should practice agility that is commensurate with their scale and do so with a fair bit of rigor. They should be really good at that agility and good at self-criticism. Now, by this point, they've actually probably figured out what tools work best for them, but I might recommend a hybrid approach. You can create a paved path for using behind-the-firewall tools like Bitbucket Data Center and Bamboo, but then also give your individual teams the flexibility to use Bitbucket Cloud and pipelines where it makes sense. Now, I mentioned this sort of evolution is hard, and it can be harder for some organizations than others. And we have a few resources that might be of use to organizations that want to start to go down this road. First of all, hi, I'm a TAM. If you'd like to talk to someone about the TAM program, we're out on the show floor. You can come by the Enterprise Solutions Hub. But we've also written up some documentation that you can just go to our website and take a look at. So the founders talked about the team playbook during the first keynote. That is a great resource out there that consists of step-by-step instructions and new ways of learning how to improve your overall team health. Take a look at that. The second is that we have this DevOps-focused microsite at Atlassian.com/DevOps. If you have people in your organization that think they know what DevOps is, but they really don't, and you want to give them some stuff to read, go there. Did anyone do the DevOps simulation workshop at the beginning of the week? A couple of hands? OK. Was it fun? Big thumbs up? Excellent. It is one of my favorite things that we do. Okay? If you've never had the chance to hear about it, go talk to that guy who put his thumb up. Otherwise, we'd love to talk to you about it. It is a great exercise for a couple of dozen people. We can do this on site. And it really does a great job at effectively explaining DevOps practices and cultures using a hands-on and non-technical simulation experience. And finally, we have a CI and CD microsite at Atlassian.com/continuous-delivery. It's a great resource for brushing up on all of the continuous concepts. And it's a really great place to send colleagues who maybe don't grasp the value of continuous integration and deployment and delivery. Now, when I said earlier that we see ourselves as the collaboration framework for DevOps, it's really important for me to point out that our CI and CD tools are just one part of that. Each of these types of organizations are going to see seriously great returns with integrations with Jira and Confluence, Statuspage, OpsGenie, and so on. But this is by no means the final word. There are also many strong integrations with other tools out in the ecosystem. Many of our largest Bitbucket Data Center customers are huge Jenkins customers. Many cloud CI providers integrate with Bitbucket Cloud. The ecosystem that we have is vast, and this is just a small smattering of the integrating products that our customers use right now. And many of these vendors are out on the show floor, and you can go talk to them. Ultimately, we want our customers to be wildly successful. Before I end today, I want to leave you with just a few parting thoughts. And if you have any questions, I've got some time after. I'm happy to talk to people down here, but I have like 40 seconds left. So I will be out on the show floor at the Solutions Hub for enterprise customers until Ship It starts, though, if you'd like to come talk to me there. Now, I have been purposefully specific about each customer type and the possible solutions for them, but that was just for the sake of example. Each one of our tools, or one of the tools that integrates with the Atlassian stack, may be able to find a good fit for any one of those customer types and the many states that are in between. There are plenty of highly flexible, risk-aware customers that aren't interested in cloud services, and they might find that per-build containers are just perfect for them. I spent a fair bit of time talking about the cascading review concept because I see a lot of customers get hung up on compliance concerns. Compliance absolutely can be a primary focus, and your teams can still innovate. We use our own tools to maintain our compliance controls, and we think that large enterprises can do the same thing. Now, last, but absolutely not least, I urge you to focus first on your culture. I could talk about our tools all day. No, literally, I could talk about them all day. I love what we build, and I love that my job includes getting to talk about the software that we make. But what our tools enable is far more important, and that is unleashing the potential on every team. That potential comes from the people and the culture within the team. And if you skip the first step of knowing who you are in for a rude awakening when your choices and your culture conflict later. So thank you very much for your time. Have a great evening.